We're in Honolulu. Why didn't you come to the airport yesterday? Sweetie? My mother's sugary voice through the phone made my stomach turn. I stood frozen in the middle of Dallas International Airport, my packed suitcase beside me. As the truth slowly sank in, they had deliberately lied about our flight date. My name is Jocelyn Adams, and I never thought my own parents would stoop this low. I'd been looking forward to this family vacation for months, desperately needing a break after an exhausting quarter at work. As a marketing executive, I'd just finished hosting important clients from overseas, and this trip was supposed to be my reward, a chance to relax and reconnect with my family. What do you mean yesterday? I managed to say, my voice shaking. You told me the flight was today at 2 p.m. I have the text messages to prove it. The bustling airport suddenly felt suffocating as other travelers rushed past me, their excitement for their own journeys only highlighting my growing devastation. Oh, sweetie, there must have been some confusion, my mother replied, but I could hear the lie in her voice. Your sister made it just fine. We're all settled in at the resort now. Of course my sister made it. Amy was always their priority, their golden child. I should have known something was off when they insisted on handling all the flight arrangements themselves, claiming it would be easier that way. The same parents who relied on me to help pay their bills somehow couldn't trust me to book my own ticket. This wasn't a confusion, Mom, I said, my voice growing stronger as anger replaced shock. You deliberately gave me the wrong date. You never wanted me on this trip. Did you? The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, now Jocelyn, don't be dramatic. These things happen. I ended the call, my hand trembling. Around me, families embraced as they prepared for their own vacations, while I stood alone, betrayed by the people who should have loved me most. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been sending them money every month for the past 2 years, helping them maintain their lifestyle after my dad's early retirement. They relied on my financial support for everything from medical bills to groceries. And still, they chose to exclude me from our family vacation. Looking at my useless suitcase, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. But more than sadness, I felt a burning anger rising inside me. This wasn't just about a missed vacation. It was about years of manipulation and favoritism. And standing there in the airport, I made a decision that would change everything. I've always wondered if my parents ever truly saw me as their daughter, or just as their personal bank account. Growing up, everything was about Amy, her dance recitals, her straight A's, her perfect smile. I learned to live in her shadow, but I never stopped trying to earn my parents' love and approval. After graduating college, I threw myself into my marketing career, working overtime and weekends to climb the corporate ladder, while Amy pursued her dreams of becoming an actress. Funded by our parents' retirement savings, I was building something real. Within 5 years, I had earned my position as the youngest executive at my firm, managing major client accounts and a team of 15 people. That's when my dad decided to retire early due to his arthritis. Their savings had dwindled from supporting Amy's failed acting career, and suddenly they were struggling to make ends meet. Without hesitation, I stepped in to help. Every month, I sent them $2 to cover their mortgage and utilities. When unexpected medical bills came up, I covered those too. Last year alone, I gave them over $30, money I had planned to use for a down payment on my own house. We're so blessed to have such a generous daughter, my mom would say during our weekly calls. But those calls always ended the same way, with updates about Amy's latest audition or her new headshots. They never asked about my work or my life unless they needed something. 2 months ago, when they mentioned planning a family trip to Hawaii, I was thrilled. Finally, a chance to spend quality time together. They insisted on handling all the arrangements since Dad had airline miles to use. Don't worry about anything, they said, just focus on your big client meeting. We'll take care of everything. Like a fool, I believed them. I even transferred extra money to their account to help cover the resort expenses. It's the least I can do, I told them, imagining lazy days on the beach and family dinners watching the sunset. I thought maybe this trip would be different, that they would finally see me as more than just their financial safety net. Instead, here I was, standing in an empty airport with a packed suitcase and a broken heart. My phone buzzed with a new message. A photo from Amy of her and our parents at the beach. Cocktails in hand. The caption read, "Family vacation begins. Missing you, sis. Wish you could have made it." The rage that filled me in that moment was unlike anything I'd ever felt before. Standing there in the airport, staring at Amy's photo, something inside me finally snapped. I started scrolling through past text messages from my parents. And the pattern became crystal clear. Every conversation about the trip had been carefully orchestrated to ensure I'd miss it. The flight's at 2 p.m. on the 15th. My mom had texted. But looking at Amy's Instagram story, I could see their boarding passes from yesterday. The 14th. Clear as day. They hadn't made a mistake. They'd planned this deception down to the last detail. My phone rang again. This time it was my father. "Jocelyn," he started, his voice stern like I was a child being scolded. "Your mother is very upset by your attitude. We made an honest mistake with the dates. And you're turning this into a drama. You're a grown woman. You should understand these things happen." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. An honest mistake? Then why did Amy know the correct date? Why did you insist on booking everything yourselves? Why have you been lying to me for weeks? "Now listen here," he began, but I cut him off. "No, Dad, you listen. I just checked my bank statements. Last week I sent you $3 for this trip. Was that a mistake too? Or did you just take my money knowing you'd leave me behind?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "Jocelyn," he finally said, his voice softer now, trying a different approach. "You know we're on a fixed income. We needed that money for the trip. You're doing so well in your career. You understand about making sacrifices for family, don't you?" My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold the phone. "Sacrifices for family? I've been making sacrifices for years. I've given up my savings, my dreams of buying a house, everything to support you and Mom. And this is how you repay me? Don't be selfish," he snapped. "Your sister needed this vacation. She's been under so much stress with her acting career and her acting career." I interrupted, my voice rising. "You mean the hobby you've been funding with my money while she lives rent-free in your house? The auditions that never lead anywhere while I work 60-hour weeks to support all of you? That's enough," he shouted. "I won't stand for this disrespect. You've changed, Jocelyn. Money has made you cruel." In that moment, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, but now it was hardening into resolve. "You're right about one thing, Dad. I have changed. And things are about to change even more." I ended the call and opened my banking app. It was time to close the Bank of Jocelyn. Permanently. The drive home from the airport was a blur of anger and determination. I spent the evening documenting everything. Screenshots of text messages, bank transfers, a detailed spreadsheet of every penny I'd given them over the past 2 years. The total made me feel sick. $47.850. That's what my parents' love had cost me. The next morning, I walked into my bank and closed the joint account I'd opened to transfer money to them. Then I called my company's HR department to remove my parents as beneficiaries from my life insurance policy. With each step, I felt lighter, as if I was finally breaking free from invisible chains. That's when the messages started flooding in. First came the guilt trips from my mother. "I can't sleep knowing you're upset with us. This is tearing our family apart. How could you be so heartless?" Then Amy joined in. "Oh my God, you're being so dramatic. It was just a miscommunication. Mom's crying every day because of you." But it was my father's message that really showed their true colors. "We raised you better than this. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us? Your mother needs her medication refilled this week. Don't you dare abandon your responsibilities to this family." I stared at my phone, amazed by their audacity. My responsibilities to the family? What about their responsibility to treat me with basic respect? Instead of responding, I drafted a clear, firm email. "Dear Mom, Dad, and Amy, I've done a lot of thinking since yesterday. The Hawaii incident wasn't a miscommunication. It was a deliberate choice to exclude me while still taking my money. This pattern of behavior ends now. Effective immediately. I am cutting off all financial support. The money I've provided was a choice, not an obligation. You'll need to find another way to cover your expenses. Do not contact me about money again. I need time and space to reevaluate our relationship. Thanks." Within minutes, my phone exploded with calls and texts. My mother left sobbing voicemails about how they'd lose the house. Amy sent angry messages calling me selfish and heartless. My father's texts grew increasingly threatening, warning me about consequences if I didn't come to my senses. I blocked them all. That evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, doubt tried to creep in. Years of conditioning had taught me to put their needs first, to believe I was selfish for having boundaries. But then I remembered standing in that airport, realizing they had planned and executed their betrayal while spending my money. The next day at work, I received an unexpected visit. My Aunt Rose, my father's sister, walked into my office. I heard what happened, she said, sitting down across from me. Your parents asked me to talk sense into you. I braced myself for more guilt trips. But Rose surprised me. What they did was cruel. Jocelyn, I've watched them take advantage of your kindness for years. It's time someone told you the truth. You deserve better than this. Tears welled up in my eyes as she reached across the desk and squeezed my hand. Finally, someone in my family saw me. Really saw me. They'll try everything to pull you back in. Rose warned. Stay strong. You're doing the right thing. 2 weeks after sending that email, I discovered something that made the Hawaii incident look trivial. Rose called me during my lunch break, her voice tight with concern. Jocelyn, I need to show you something. Can you come to my house after work? When I arrived, she had a stack of papers spread across her dining room table. Your father came to me last week, asking for a loan. He let slip some things that didn't add up. So I did some digging. What she showed me made my blood run cold. Bank statements, loan applications, and credit card bills painted a disturbing picture. My parents hadn't just been using my money for basic expenses. They'd been living far beyond their means, counting on my support to cover their extravagant lifestyle. Look at this. Rose pointed to a credit card statement. They took out a new card in your name 3 months ago. Have you checked your credit report recently? My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and downloaded my credit report. There it was, a $15 credit card I never knew existed. They had used my social security number and personal information to open it. That's identity theft, Rose said quietly. It's a crime. Jocelyn, I felt like I couldn't breathe. How could they do this? There's more, Rose continued. Remember that story about Amy's acting career? She's not even in California for auditions. She's been living at home this whole time, working part-time at a local coffee shop. The money they claimed was for her headshots and acting classes? They've been using it for gambling. The room spun as pieces fell into place. The constant requests for more money. The vague explanations. The guilt trips when I asked questions. It wasn't just emotional manipulation. It was fraud. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. Please, sweetie, we need to talk. Your father's having chest pains from all this stress. If anything happens to him, it'll be your fault. I showed Rose the message. She shook her head. More manipulation. They're desperate because their house of cards is falling apart without your money. What should I do? You have 2 choices, Rose said. You can press charges for the identity theft, or you can handle this privately. But either way, you need to protect yourself. I thought about years of sacrifice, of putting their needs before mine, of believing their lies. The chest pains, the tears, the guilt trips. It was all part of their game. I want to talk to them one last time, I said, face to face. But I need you there with me. Rose nodded. I'll set it up. But first we need to gather evidence and freeze your credit. They've shown you who they really are. Jocelyn, believe them. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about all the dreams I'd put on hold to support them. The house I wanted to buy. The vacations I never took. The savings I should have had. They hadn't just stolen my money. They'd stolen years of my life. But as I lay there, something else occurred to me. For the first time in my adult life, I felt truly clear-headed. The fog of manipulation was lifting, and in its place was a steel-like resolve. They wanted to play games? Fine. But this time, I would be the one making the rules. The confrontation was set for Saturday afternoon at Rose's house. I spent the morning with a lawyer, understanding my options regarding the identity theft. Then I prepared a folder with all the evidence. The credit card statements, bank transfers, text messages, everything. I needed them to understand that their game was over. When my parents arrived, Amy was with them, She looked nothing like the carefree girl in those Hawaii photos. Her face was drawn. Guilty. They filed into Rose's living room like children called to the principal's office. "Thank you for coming," I began, my voice steady. "I've discovered some things we need to discuss." "Jocelyn," my mother interrupted, tears already starting. "Before you say anything, you need to know." "No." I cut her off. "I'm talking now." I pulled out the credit card statements. "Would anyone like to explain this?" The color drained from my father's face. Amy looked confused, but my mother jumped in quickly. "It was an emergency. We were going to tell you." "An emergency?" I laid out more papers. "Like the gambling debts? Or the maxed out credit cards? Or maybe Amy's fake acting career?" Amy's head snapped up. "What do you mean, fake?" I turned to her. "You really don't know? They've been telling me you're in California pursuing acting. That's where all my money supposedly went. Your headshots, classes, rent." "What?" Amy looked at our parents in shock. "I've been working at Starbucks. They told me you refused to help with my college tuition." The room erupted in chaos. Amy started crying. My mother tried to explain. And my father stood up, his face red with anger. "Enough," he shouted. "We did what we had to do. You don't understand." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said, pulling out my final piece of evidence. "You committed identity theft. That's a federal crime. I have two choices here. Press charges or handle this privately. Your decision." My mother collapsed into theatrical sobs. "You wouldn't. We're your parents." "Parents don't steal from their children," Rose interjected. "Parents don't lie and manipulate and commit fraud." Just then, my father clutched his chest and staggered. "My heart," he gasped. "Call an ambulance." For a moment, I almost fell for it. But then I saw my mother's face. Not panic, but calculation. This was their final play. Their attempt to regain control. "No," I said firmly. "No more manipulation. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign a repayment agreement for every penny you stole. You're going to close that fraudulent credit card. And you're going to leave me alone." "And if we refuse?" my father asked, his heart attack mysteriously forgotten. "Then I'll press charges and you can explain your actions to a judge." The silence that followed was deafening. Finally, my father nodded, defeated. My mother stared at the floor, her tears suddenly dry. "And Amy?" Amy looked at me like she was seeing me clearly for the first time. As they signed the repayment agreement my lawyer had prepared, I felt no satisfaction, only a deep, hollow sadness for the family I thought I had. In the weeks that followed, my parents' carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. Without my financial support, they were forced to sell their house and move into a small apartment. The repayment agreement meant most of their retirement income went to paying back what they'd stolen from me. It wasn't revenge, it was justice. Amy moved in with Rose temporarily while she figured out her next steps. She called me one evening, her voice small and uncertain. I had no idea what they were doing. She said, "All these years they've been playing us against each other. I'm so sorry, Jocelyn." Her apology meant something, but it couldn't erase years of damage. Still, it was a start. My parents made one final attempt to manipulate me. They showed up at my office unannounced, causing a scene in the lobby. "We'll lose everything," my mother wailed. "After all we've sacrificed for you." I stood my ground, surrounded by concerned colleagues. "You lost me," I said calmly. "That's the only thing that matters. And it was your choice." Security escorted them out, and as I watched them leave, I felt nothing but peace. The guilt that had weighed me down for years was gone. I was no longer their ATM, their emotional punching bag, or their victim. That evening I booked a trip to Hawaii. Just for me. As I confirmed the reservation, I smiled at the irony. They had tried to exclude me from a family vacation. But in doing so they had given me something priceless. Freedom. 3 months later, I stood on a beach in Maui, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. This wasn't the family vacation I'd originally imagined. But it was exactly what I needed. My phone, peaceful without the constant barrage of guilt-tripping messages, buzzed with a text from Rose. "They're finally moving out of the house this weekend," she wrote. "Amy's enrolled in community college. She's asking about having coffee with you when you're back." I took a deep breath of salt air and replied, "Tell her I'm open to it." The repayment plan was working. Slowly but surely. My parents had sold most of their possessions. And every month, a check arrived from them without fail. Not because they were sorry, but because they had no choice. The fraud charges I'd held back would surface if they missed a single payment. My mother still tried sending emotional emails through different accounts. We're eating ramen noodles while you're living in luxury. Is this what you wanted? I deleted them without responding. Their guilt trips had lost their power over me. At work, I'd earned another promotion. The energy I used to spend managing my parents' chaos now went into building my own life. I'd even started looking at houses. A dream I'd put on hold for years while funding their lifestyle. Standing there on the beach, I finally understood. Sometimes the happiest endings don't involve forgiveness or reconciliation. Sometimes they're about walking away and choosing yourself. My parents had planned this Hawaii trip to hurt me. But instead, they'd set me free.